Have you ever read a book and wondered about the hidden stories behind its pages? What if we tell you that the real-life story of Lolita is much darker than you could have imagined? It's true, and today, we'll unravel the true events that inspired Vladimir Nabokov's infamous novel Lolita. It is a controversial novel which sheds light on the heartbreaking reality that has been hidden in pages of fiction. Now, let's explore the spine-chilling reality behind the real Lolita story. The innocent victim, Florence Sally Horner. You might be surprised to learn that the novel Lolita was actually inspired by a tragic real-life story. In 1948, an 11-year-old girl named Florence Sally Horner was kidnapped and held captive by a man named Frank La Salle. This frightening ordeal served as the foundation for Nabokov's novel. This novel talks about themes of madness, manipulation, and guilt. Who was Florence Sally Horner? And how did her life change? Let's begin by taking a look at her life before the nightmare began and how a seemingly ordinary day in 1948 changed everything for her. So, Florence was a regular girl from Camden, New Jersey, attending school and living with her mother and older sister. But one unfortunate day, her world was turned upside down. She got in a bit of trouble when she was caught stealing a 5-cent notebook from a store. Little did she know, the person who caught her was Frank La Salle, a man with a dark past and sinister intentions. Instead of calling the authorities, La Salle decided to exploit the situation. He convinced Florence that he was an FBI agent and she was in deep trouble for her actions. The only way to avoid punishment, he told her, was to do exactly as he said. And just like that, she found herself trapped. Months later, Frank intercepted Sally on the way home from school. He told her the government wanted him to bring her to Atlantic City and that she'd be taken care of once there. Frank had Sally tell her mom she was traveling to Atlantic City with friends. When he picked her up, he made Sally tell her mom that he was the father of one of the girls. After that day, Sally started to stay with him and Frank took complete advantage of it. He forced the 11-year-old into sex acts. And soon after, they began to live together and used to travel across the country. He eventually enrolled her in grammar school in Texas before they moved to California. She posed as his daughter in public but lived as his partner in private. Frank told the neighbors that his wife died in an accident. But one neighbor, Ruth, felt weird about the two and sensed something was off. On multiple occasions, she tried to get Sally to open up but couldn't get anything out of her. Eventually, Sally told Ruth that she'd been abducted from her family. In a panic, Ruth called the FBI, screaming into the phone about what she'd discovered. Frank was arrested and sentenced to 35 years in prison. Sally was returned to her mother 2 years after her kidnapping and enrolled in school again. The startling similarities between Sally Horner and Lolita. You might be surprised to know that Sally Horner's case is even mentioned in the book, yet many people fail to make the connection. Both Sally Horner and Lolita's stories began in the same year, and they both lived with single mothers. In chapter 33 of Lolita, Humbert questions his actions, asking if he had done to Lolita what Frank La Salle did to Sally Horner in 1948. Interestingly, Frank La Salle pretended his wife had died in an accident, while Humbert's wife actually did die in an accident. Although, it's worth noting that Humbert may have been involved in her death, as the accident occurred right after she discovered his diary about Lolita and confronted him about it. Both Frank La Salle and Humbert traveled the country with their captives, who posed as their daughters. In the end, both men faced the consequences of their actions, with their lives ruined by these twisted relationships and ultimately dying in prison. Even Nabokov had a note card in his archives referencing Sally Horner's case, describing her as a cross-country slave and La Salle as a middle-aged morals offender who was branded a moral leper by the sentencing judge. The sad truth of Sally's story and its impact on Lolita. Alright, guys, now let's talk about the immensely tragic aspects of Sally Horner's story and how Nabokov addressed victim shaming in Lolita. It's heartbreaking to know that Sally was not only victimized by her captor but also by society, just as women and girls often are in rape or harassment cases. Some media outlets spun the narrative and blamed Sally for her own abduction, suggesting that if she hadn't been stealing the notebook, she wouldn't have been kidnapped. Nabokov may have taken this insinuation and incorporated it into the character of Lolita, who's depicted as flirtatious, rebellious, and seemingly seductive. But here's where many critics find brilliance in the book: reality is being warped. Was Lolita really the initiator, or is this the rapist mentality at work? Is Humbert projecting his own perversions onto her? He justifies his lust for young girls due to a traumatic early experience, echoing what modern-day sex offenders say to excuse themselves. As the story unfolds, Lolita learns to manipulate Humbert and eventually leaves him for a playwright. However, she dies during childbirth, just as Sally Horner, who also faced a tragic end, dying in a car wreck at the age of 15. Lolita challenges readers to confront dark and complex subjects, ultimately serving as a guide to recognizing abuse and pedophiles. Offenders often hide in plain sight, creating elaborate stories not only to protect themselves but also to justify their behavior. In the end, the book forces us to face uncomfortable truths about society's treatment of victims and the horrifying reality of young girls being kidnapped and victimized by older men. So, while Lolita is a work of fiction, its roots in the real-life story of Sally Horner serve as a powerful reminder of the injustices that many victims face. While Nabokov may have drawn inspiration from Sally's case, it is essential to understand how the book perpetuates harmful point of views. The troubling point of view in Lolita and how it differs from the book. In the novel Lolita, we see a super twisted perspective of the protagonist, Humbert, a middle-aged guy obsessed with young girls. He refers to them as an infets. The story is all about his infatuation and disturbing relationship with a 12-year-old girl named Dolores Hayes, or Lolita. What's more troubling is that the entire book is told from Humbert's point of view, forcing us to see things through his warped lens. Sometimes people even feel sympathy for him. For example, Humbert describes Lolita as the temptress who flirts and asks him to have sex with her. Yet months earlier, he'd kept a private diary detailing how he longed for her touch. He even marries Lolita's mother just to get closer to her. Messed up, right? As if this wasn't enough, the novel was later on adapted by various movie directors. Stanley Kubrick in 1962 and another one by Adrian Lyne in 1997 are two prime examples. The films are different from the novel in some crucial ways. For one, we don't have that first-person narrative from Humbert, which means we're not directly exposed to his twisted thoughts and justifications. This gives us a more objective view of what's going on, and it's harder to feel empathy for him. Plus, in the movies, Lolita comes across as a bit more assertive and aware, whereas in the book, she's more of a victim of Humbert's manipulation. This shift in portrayal can make the films feel a bit less disturbing, but it's essential to remember that the core of the story is still about a young girl being preyed upon by an older man. The influence on Lolita and its lasting impact. The novel has been both praised for its literary brilliance and criticized for its controversial themes. But no matter where you stand, one thing's for sure, the dark truth behind the real Lolita story will never be forgotten. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to hit that like button, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel for more fascinating content.